Okay, so today we're going to discuss mindset and sort of we could aim that towards mindset related to both growth and leadership and whatnot.
Mhm.
But the reason why I wanted to bring that up was mindset is something that I've been focusing on primarily and much more practically with jiu-jitsu. So
Mhm.
mindset approach of when you go into a sparring match, what is your mindset, your mentality going into it? Is it to, let's say, either win or to get into advantageous positions? Or is it a mindset of, whether it's like, oh, I'll just be lazy, I'll let this guy do what they want to do. And what I was reflecting on was often I didn't even have a mindset. It was just like, I'm
Mhm.
just here. I'm just existing. And
Mhm.
I mean, there's a time for that, but there's also a time for having a focus and being driven and motivated towards something.
Mhm.
And then, kind of in the professional area, just mindset of what is going on around me and am I going to let that affect my internal game and what I'm trying to do with my life. So, my own mindset in that regard. But
Mhm.
maybe you want to talk a little bit about your own experience with mindset and where it's helped you.
Um, First off, I think we actually need to break down the word mindset because I think it's something that I feel like you have a definition of, but I'm not sure exactly if that's correct because I think that you're kind of pointing at, I guess, a few different directions at once with it. I think it'd be good to first kind of narrow down on what mindset is. What do you think of it as?
So to me, mindset is a degree of mental preparation, right?
Mhm.
Like, what are your internal thoughts? I mean, that could be one aspect of it, but let's say before you do a task, what is your, I guess, what would they call that?
So I might define it as intentionality. So it's
Yeah,
like, what is my intent? What is my focus? Kind of what is my object or goal? Would be probably like one definition that you're kind of. I think that's what you're more alluding to when you're saying mindset, right?
for sure when it comes to jujitsu. It's like,
Mhm.
what is my intention? I'm about to spar with someone.
Mhm.
What do I intend to do? What would I hope to happen?
Mhm.
That kind of thing.
So when I think of mindset, I kind of think of Carol Dweck's book Mindset, and I kind of think of it as a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. Um, and I think there's multiple definitions of mindset. That's just the one I think of, and basically that the idea of a growth mindset is that you can improve and get better and stuff like that. Whereas a fixed mindset is basically like, hey, I am who I am what I am, and that's it. You mean like
Which is it for a lot of people.
it is. You mean
Mm-hmm.
it's not uncommon.
Yeah.
Like the idea of like learned helplessness. So I'd probably categorize that inside the category of mindset. And they actually said that humans are the basically have the highest learned helplessness of any kind of animal and stuff like that. So in the study, like you need to put like a puppy into like kind of this box where it gets shocks and stuff like that, and there's no way to escape. And then if you did it again, then when the shocks started coming, even if the puppy could escape, it wouldn't. It would just
Mm-hmm.
lie down and whimper.
Mm-hmm.
With humans, you can almost do it just with words. You can tell somebody like, "Hey, you're not any good at this," and stuff like that, and you can kind of shut them down, and they really haven't even had any experience of it. Like it could just be like, "You're no good with girls," and you mean they haven't really been interacted with any, or even tried to go pursue any romantically, and then they've just kind of ingrained that into who they are. So I think it'd be good to first clarify: do you mean kind of growth mindset versus fixed mindset, or intentionality?
It's tricky because it's somewhere in between,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, it's
So they
almost
are
even,
interrelated.
yeah, right. So there is a bit of both, and
Mm-hmm.
for sure, like the importance of having a growth mindset, both for learning, growing, and whether it's becoming a leader or whatever you decide to do, that's very important. But
Mm-hmm.
also just intentionality. So, like, let's say you're sitting down for a test.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when you go into that test, are you even trying to get a good mark?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like that's what I'm kind of saying.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's something that's I had observed was very clear to me in jiu-jitsu. It's like I'm not even sure if I'm trying to get an advantageous position mentally in my mind. Like, hey, Najib, you're going for that advantageous position. You're going to get the takedown. You're going to get up on
Mm-hmm.
top, right? That kind of in the middle, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I necessarily struggle with a growth mindset. I don't think you do either.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's certainly something we should talk about as well. And then the intentionality aspect as well.
So the intentionality, I think, so I'm starting to understand more what you're saying. So when you come into a test, how do you approach it? Or when you come into problems, how do you approach it and stuff like that? It's an interesting question because, like, for me with school, a lot of times I didn't necessarily have to study. And, like, one comes into mind of, like, one of my statistics classes in university. And, like, I hadn't shown up for a month or however long. And I was basically, I looked at the schedule and I'm pretty sure it was supposed to be midterm was on Thursday, and so I came in on the Tuesday for it to, like, oh yeah, I might as well get like some prep and study ahead. But it turns out that Tuesday they're actually having the midterm. I'm not sure if they bumped it up or I read it wrong or whatever. I was like, oh, like, I hadn't done anything, like no prep, no whatever. But it's like, okay, this can be fun. I mean, like, I actually had some excitement about it. It's like, ooh, like this is a thrill, and like I had to like ask like my friend behind me, like, hey, do you have like a pencil? Because I had to ask my buddy beside me, like, hey, you mind if we share the calculator? Like, maybe you take it for 5 minutes, and then I'll take it for 5 minutes, and we'll go back and forth. Because I didn't have nothing. Like, I had nothing.
Like, you knew these guys, they were your
Yeah.
friend. Okay. It wasn't just like a class buddy.
Well, they were like, they kind of like, I'd made friends with them the first few weeks of class, but you mean like we weren't like tight, but you mean it was just like, I just had like a kind of friendly, go-lucky personality. And I remember the girl who I borrowed the pencil from, she was like really high strung, steady and stuff like that. And I ended up getting a higher score on her for that midterm than, but I just looked at it as a game. It was just like, hey, let's have some fun. Because you mean, it's like, I kind of look at it from zero. Like, it's maybe nothing and then go up. But it wasn't always that way. Like, back when I was in grade 6, grade 7, grade 8, I think it started grade 6 because that's when we had the provincial tests, achievement tests, is I'd get stress blisters all along my fingers. Like, it'd just be like a whole bunch of like water blisters because I just would get so stressed out about like these kind of final exams and stuff like that, and just had so much importance to it. And I had my naturopath at the time who was like, you can either have your stress and you'll keep the blisters, or you can let go of it and let go of the blisters. And I'm like, well, these blisters really suck because I'm trying to write tests, and I'm trying to have a pencil and it's super itchy and uncomfortable. It's just the worst thing ever.
Like a wooden pencil with blisters, like that doesn't sound fun.
No, it wasn't. Yeah. And after that, I was just like, these tests don't matter. Like, it's like, it's, to me, I look at life a lot of times like playing a game. Like, you can get into a game where you're super stressed and super anxious and tired and grumpy, and you'll see it like the streamers and stuff like that, like slam like their keyboard and like all this kind of stuff and break stuff over a game. And whereas like if you just have some fun with it, it's not always. I'm not perfect, but like if you just recognize like, hey, this is just a game. This test is just a game, and we're just playing to have some fun here. I think that really changes it. And I don't see many people play that way, like interact in life that way. They're just, I find a lot of people are too serious, they're too tense, they're too holding on.
Well, and that's a challenge too, because like I'm very playful in my classroom and at school, and I often wonder if people mistake that for foolishness. Like, oh, this guy's a fool. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's a bumbling idiot. Let's say on the more meaner comments, but I can understand that people, especially in professional settings or whatever is kind of their top of their pyramid, like that's their focus of their life, that they want to be serious to also then be taken seriously as well, right? Because even I wonder in jiu-jitsu, like for a lot of people, I just openly tell them like, no man, it's just a game for me. Like, I'm just playing, right? I'm having fun, I'm hanging out. Whereas for some people, it's like, this is my life, man. Like, I'm getting ready for a competition 3 months, right? And at the gym I'm training at now, a bunch of people went to Vegas, they won gold, and I found out that many of these divisions have 30 people competing. So if you won gold, you had to beat 5 people, which is very impressive, right? And so it's interesting, right? Like having those different mindsets, having those different intentionalities, and how that can affect your performance, right? Because for some of us, and particularly for myself, like if my intentionality wasn't like, okay, like I'm trying to win, I'm trying to get into a good position, oftentimes I end up just getting squished under people, which is not fun, right? But at the same time, if it's like, I just know, especially with jiu-jitsu, that super serious, super high strung just isn't my style. Like, it's just not going to work well for me. And so finding a bit of that healthy medium, because even my students struggle with like, and who knows what's going on at home, but for many of them, it's like they're very, very that word? They're just so focused on the outcome rather than, let's say, the experience or the process of learning. And so their mindset, their mentality, their intentionality is to get that good grade and not necessarily, at least in my estimation, I haven't had very open conversations on that topic with them. It isn't necessarily like, okay, how can I improve by 10% this year so that I'm better next year, right? And 10%, I mean more of an internal 10%, not like, okay, I was getting 60s last year, 70s this year, although that's not necessarily a terrible approach either. But, you know, so what helped you shift that mindset in grade 6?
So part of what I was thinking about too when you're talking is, so there's a few different examples I was thinking of. Is like, one, I was watching the Super Bowl highlights from last year of the Bengals versus, I think, the LA Rams. And one of the things I noticed is that, like, about 3/4 of the way through the game, I think the quarterback of the Rams was going through a team. It's like, let's remember to have some fun. Like, I mean, we're in the Super Bowl. Like, this is really cool. And especially, I think it was Stafford, who played for the Detroit Lions for like 12 years and lost like every game. Like, it was like a 1-13 every season.
Oh my God.
And then finally he gets traded to the Rams, and then they end up winning the Super Bowl that year. It was very interesting. But it's like, you mean, in particular, they're playing a game, and it's like, have some fun with it. And then two, it makes me think of essentialism, is that play actually changes the circuits in our brain. Is that when we get very tense, we very narrow down, and we can't see what's going on. And he talked about Jaak Panksepp's book, Neurology, like Jordan Peterson talks about it too, I can't remember. But basically it's all about rat play and stuff like that, and how rats will work to play and stuff like that. But it's, when you play, you actually change the way you see things, is that you're actually open to opportunities, open to potential and stuff like that. And so when you do a test and you see it as a game, it becomes a lot more fun. You get to see, you just get to relax and just see it, observe it, and kind of see everything going on. But I think when you get tense, you tend to lock down, and you're not able to connect into your periphery and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, you lose sight of the peripheral, right? And so maybe that capacity that our brains have to connect loosely understood information together in a new way, you lose access to that because you're just so focused, you're so stressed on this outcome, right?
And I think it's good to recognize, it's like, I think a lot of it comes back to that growth mindset, is that I know that I can kind of become whatever I want to be. And I feel like a lot of people in society can do that. It's tricky. IQ does play a big role in life. But like,
and intentionality, right? Like, if you don't have that intent and purpose towards it.
But it's like, we have so much in today's world, and when I think of school and I think of these tests, it's like, one of Jim Rohn's sayings is that standard education gets you standard results. And so if you want to have the same life as everybody else has, I mean, take the same path that everybody else takes. So take the school, take the job, take the whatever. But to me, life has so much opportunity. It's like, I was thinking last night, it's like, one, I've met a lot of the goals that I've wanted in my life, of kind of like time freedom, having my own business and things like that. But to me, there's just always so many more games to play, like experimenting with the X3 kind of fitness muscle workout system is very interesting, of like,
we're just going through physical experiments, right? Because you did gymnastic bodies for a while.
Yep.
I mean, I think you tried conventional lifting as well.
Yep.
You're
CrossFit,
now doing
yoga.
CrossFit, yoga. Now doing kind of a more, I don't know, I guess like high tech. I mean, you're using a very fancy piece of equipment, but high tech, low tech as well, right? But that bit of experimentation, leaving it open to, like, I'm not going to get this perfect, but I'm going to keep trying until I find something that works.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fun. And for me, like, life in general is that you get to experiment and make mistakes and learn from those mistakes and try again. And we have so much opportunity at our hands. Like, one of the things I've been noticing is that there's like almost like an infinite amount of homesteader YouTubers now, where they're like, I was watching one in the Arizona desert, and they're trying to green up the desert there, and it's very interesting because, like, I have my gripes with YouTube and the censorship and stuff like that, but it's given so many different people an opportunity to kind of create a business, a lifestyle, and stuff like that. That if you're good at video recording, editing, you can kind of create this lifestyle. it's a lot of work. You mean a lot of YouTubers I watch, it's like they're having to put out, like they're not only having to work like a 60-hour week just living their life, they're having to put on like another 40 hours doing YouTube, which is absurd to me. So it's very much favors industrial, but you can do so much with your life that you can, like, you just have so much time in a lot of respects if you set it up that way. You mean? And you can have so much freedom, and it's like even COVID's really kind of expanded that. Like my tutoring business wouldn't be able to have the amount of freedom it does without COVID. You mean, and working from home. And so to me, it does come back to your mindset about like, do you play it as a game? And like to me, I look to play to win. So it's like when I play to win, it's not an attachment to winning; it's an experimentation to winning. You mean? So like I'm willing to try crazy stuff to see what works. Like I remember when we were in Disney World, they had a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire game show that was just kind of like a mock-up where it's kind of like a ride. And I just kind of, after playing it a few times, I recognized like basically what it is. They give you a question, you have to order the answers in order or whatever, and the fastest person to do that gets on stage. And I recognized like there's no way I'm going to be able to think, do this question, get up on stage. So I just put in random numbers. And I just did it as fast as I could. Like, it was just like, boom. And within like 2 or 3 times, I was up at the front. Like, I was on stage. And an audience of like 50, 100 people and stuff like that. Because I just got the game. I was just like, oh, you mean, it's not actually about knowing. It's just there's only so many permutations that you can have when you have 4 numbers. And it's like, I'm just going to guess. And at least I have a chance at winning there. Because, you mean, there's a lot of smart people that know a lot more than me. Because I was like, I don't know, 16 years old at the time. But here's how I can play the game and I can win. And you mean, there's so many different ways, like even your student who, you mean, you told him kind of some advice with women and you mean a month or 2 later, he's got a girlfriend. It's like we can each have our own little game that we can play and we can win at. And it's just so much more fun that way. You mean, it's like, you can go through a life like he was and it's not that fun. Like, you mean, you're kind of put it on this persona and it's not really getting the results you want.
Yeah, especially when you know in your mind, like, okay, this is something I really want, right? And you, for a variety of reasons, simply cannot achieve it. And then, you know, having that growth mindset, because I mean, it took a lot. I don't even know what internal battle he might have gone through to make that change, right? And you know, he might have been acting that way for 16, 17 years, right? And for him to shift that kind of in a one-day session of talking to him and then to see the fruit of that success, you know, 2-3 months later, and then now to see him kind of in relationship mode where he treats his girlfriend quite respectfully and he's very mindful of, let's say, fidelity or just being loyal to his relationship. And it's like, wow, that's really cool, man. It's really interesting. I'm curious then, like, because I see a lot of students and all I can do is talk to them, but many of them, you know, there's a lot of pressure coming from home. And so I've told many students this story for myself, like in grade 8. So I mean, you probably know this by now. I don't really care about my grades, and that reflected throughout university. And I didn't study much either, and you know, enjoyed myself at times. Other times it was quite difficult for a variety of reasons. But for me, it shifted in grade 8 when, you know, on my math test that I got 100%. I brought it home to my mom thinking like, okay, she'll finally be proud. And, you know, she looks at me, she goes, that's really good, you got 100%, but you could have done better. And I, right then in that moment, like, it was like, okay, like, this is a game I can't win. I'm just not going to play. I'm going to go to school and have as much fun as I can. And, you know, fortunately, I'm smart enough to do well in school without having to try much. And, like, before the start of this year, like, I was reflecting, like, man, I had so much fun growing up, like in high school, while I was living in Montreal, all these random small stints, like stuff at the mosque. Like, I had so much fun. It just made life really enjoyable. But sure, maybe that played a negative effect, had a negative role on my intentionality. But understanding that because I always had a growth mindset and was always kind of curious, open-minded, and very, very observant, that helped me grow above and beyond many and all of my peers, really. Like people at the mosque, they're kind of still stuck in the same mindset mentality, whereas like, okay, I'm like running laps around you guys, right? Like, the things that you haven't figured out since you were like 12, like I figured out like 10 years ago, right? Or whatever it is, right?
Yep.
But, if you're someone with parents who are really like hammering down on you, I mean, how would you go about, what advice would you give these people?
It's tough. I was very lucky that I had a mom that, in general, was very understanding and patient, very smart, and very helpful. Like, you kind of start to get to know her, and she's definitely got maybe some flaws and stuff like that. But I was very lucky to have a lot of freedom, and it was more my own standards that were really kind of limiting me as I was growing up. But I also have an aunt who I lived with in Edmonton and did summer school with, and she was very much like that, very type A personality, and it's like, you should always be studying and blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it was just smile and nod. Like, my sister had a different approach, and my sister likes to fight. And it just didn't really work out very well. But I just kind of like smile and nod, and then I just go kind of do whatever I want to do. And I'm also very blessed at being very smart too. Like, I'm in the top 10% of the population for IQ, and it's like, it's good not to underestimate how much that does make your life better. Like, it really does help. But it's tough. You mean, to have parents and stuff like that. Like, one thing is that, so I think one thing would be to frame is like, what is the game you're playing? So it kind of sucks. You mean like your mom's response. Because you mean, ideally parents would be proud and appreciative and stuff like that. But for the most part, it's like, if parents aren't that way when you're born and you're growing up, nothing's going to change that. Like, nothing in their life is going to change them and turn them into the kind of parent that you're actually looking for. So that part's kind of tricky and tough to deal with. A lot of it's like, you really want to set up the environment that you kind of find ideal as you can. Like, so a lot of people, that doesn't really kind of happen, so like are able to be 18, move out and stuff like that. And I do feel for the kids who are like 13, move out, and it's rough, you mean, because they've already had a rough childhood with their parents, and then trying to figure it out, living with like on the streets or whatever
Friend
it is,
or relative, yeah.
It's a rough hand you're dealt. But I think with a growth mindset, like, you can kind of take anything that you've been dealt and turn it into something amazing. Like, you kind of think about like the immigrant thing, where people come from other countries into Canada or the United States, and they tend to be the most well off, and then the next generation the most well off. It's like, adversity doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. It's like, you can actually go through adversity, and it makes you better and stronger and all that kind of stuff. So I think it'd be how you frame it. Kind of like, there's that story of two brothers and an alcoholic dad. One of them became like upstanding citizen, never drinks, all that kind of stuff. And he like, they ask him why, and it's like, well, do you see my dad? Like, I could never be like that. And then the other brother was like, becomes this town drunk and problematic, all that kind of stuff. And then they ask him like, why? And it's like, well, do you see my dad? How could I be any other way?
Mm-hmm.
And so two different people taking the same circumstances and using them in very different methods.
And that's like a very Christian theme as well, of bear your cross, right? Like, bear your burden. Like, we all have that weight, and for us, it's a variety of things. I'm realizing one of mine is like speeding, driving, right? It's something that if I pay attention to, it's like, it really bothers me to not engage in that activity, right? And it's like, it's like, and I was talking about this with some guy at the gym, and it's like, my stuff to you is like simple, whereas your stuff to me might be simple, right? But we all have that kind of burden, and for many of us, like, because I think, how old is your mom?
Around 55.
55. So my parents are like 61, 62, and they all grew up in this weird generation of like, their parents are kind of alive and around during these wars and conflict, and I don't know, like a lot of growth as well economically, and just really weird vibes. And I just think like, okay, the standards that my parents had in their childhood would have been so different than what they gave me and what I could give to my children. But kind of acknowledging like, yeah, so my parents were raised by people in a very different time, and they're maybe trying their best. So being forgiving in that regard, and then two, recognizing like that, bear your cross. Like, what is your burden? What is that weight you carry? And then recognizing that carrying the weight can oftentimes make you very strong. And then I guess the third thing is recognizing when to let go and realize like, okay, I got to play my own game. Right? One thing I tell the students, and we probably had this discussion, is like, and this is very common in the kind of dating world of like developing your frame, right? Like, what is your frame? So, for me, educationally speaking, in grade 8, I started moving into my own frame and shifting from my parents, right? Recognizing that what do I want academically and what do I want, what kind of work and balance, life balance do I want at school?
Mm-hmm.
You know, because to me, like to my parents, it's like, well, why would you ever play sports? That makes no sense. You should focus on studying. To me, it's like, no, like I want to work. I want to get a job. I want to play sports. I want to, do all these other things at school because I want this experience.
Yep.
But to my parents, it's like no work, no sports, like just education. Like grades is what's going to get you, the job and whatnot. And for many kids, it's not obvious why their parents have that message, but recognizing that for many of us, like even for you and I, we're growing up in such a unique time with technology, with access to information that we can carve a good life out for ourselves in a variety of ways, as opposed to our parents. For many of them, it was like the people that they knew who were doing the best probably did really good in school and went to university, got a good job, and got a house, bills, whatever. Like, and they're sorting that. And for many people, I guess they're kind of stuck in that static mindset of like, you're supposed to get a good job and get a house and get a wife and a kid. Nothing wrong with that, but like you're supposed to do all these things, and the only way that you can have that happen is by doing well in school, getting the job, and getting the paycheck.
Well, life's very tricky in that. So we humans are very socialized animals, and we like to copy what everybody else is doing. So it served us a lot of good evolutionarily. It's like, because if you kind of went off and did your own thing, a very good chance you're eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or something like that. But it's also very counterintuitive for actually having the life you want to have. Because I'm not sure how much you've seen it, but like I've kind of seen how it goes through like the students who worked really hard, got good grades in high school, got great grades in university, went to med school, and then the kind of working as a doctor. Very few of them are actually enjoying their lives. It's like most become a lawyer, and it's like, oh, we all hate our jobs, and it's like, or whatever it is. And it kind of makes me think of Jim Collins' work of Great by Choice, and that one of the findings that they found in there was shoot bullets, then cannonballs. So first do little experiments, like try out like 10 different things. So like if you're thinking about a job or something like that, try out 10 different jobs, kind of experiment.
Rather, if you're thinking about a certain field, try a job in there.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And then see how that goes. And then if you want to go up to higher level, see how that goes. So like your sister, she's got her legal assistant or legal aid or something like that. To me, that's a decent test. It's better, might have been better to just be a secretary in a law office, less kind of investment. But it's like, okay, at least be legal aid and see, do I like this? And then it's like, do I want to become a lawyer? At that point, it's like, I see other lawyers, are they living lives I want to live, time, all that kind of stuff.
It's interesting because she had mentioned that prior to getting married at the end of high school and whatnot, like she actually wanted to be a lawyer, and for 10 years she kind of had to put that to the side due to marriage, moving to Germany, having kids, and so it's kind of interesting. Like, and we don't really know how it's going to play out, but so far she's appreciative of what it's done for her life to have that higher paying job and to have kind of gone back into like, hey, this is something I wanted to do and didn't get the opportunity to do then.
Yep.
Right. But like her recognizing now that like, yeah, like law school isn't really in the books for me right now because it's too much time, too much money. But reminding her and coaching her that like, hey, you can keep asking these people for more opportunities. As you continue to demonstrate that like you can do this job and that you're eager and looking forward to it, right?
Well, one tricky part too is that people kind of put happiness off into the future, whereas happiness is really something you have today. And so it's kind of like, oh, like once I get the car, once I get the wife, once I get the house, once I get the whatever, like the business, the job, or whatever, the promotion, then I'll be happy. And when you get it all, you recognize it doesn't change anything. And that's a rough realization to like, work your life for this whole kind of thing. Because I think back to like one of my friends in high school that got into med school at U of A, and we were in the same biology class, very smart. He would always get about like 3 or 4% higher than me, but I knew how many hours he had to put in for that. Like, I might study for like 4 or 5 hours or something like that for a bio test, because they actually do require a lot of memorization. But he would put in 40 hours. And I was just like, man, no, like, I'd rather play video games. I'd rather go play soccer. Like, so many other things I'd rather do than spend that extra 35 hours studying for that few extra percent. Like, to me, there's always cost. Like, there's trade-offs for things. And I think you really got to think through, like, what game do I want to play in life? Like, I'm not necessarily saying, like, throw away the whole school game, because school is a lot more fun if you're doing well in it. Like, there's no doubts about that.
And you want to keep those doors open, right? Whether you choose to go through them is up to you. But leaving high school without good doors open for you is like, it's pretty sad, because it's like, okay, well, you just wasted 3 years here.
Well, I think about my first year at University of Calgary, and I withdrew from courses and didn't fail anything. So I only had good grades of like A's and B's and stuff like that for my first year. But if I kept all my courses I'd signed up for, my GPA would not have been good. And that got me scholarships, and that made a lot of things easier. So you definitely don't want to shut doors, but you also want to recognize, like, playing the game that everybody else is playing in isn't going to get you any unstandard results. So, like, you becoming probably more social, doing more all these different kind of things with the mosque and whatever, really helped you grow as a person and develop skills outside of what we call quote unquote school skills, and that's made you infinitely more valuable in that respect. So I'd recommend that for most people is like, try to master school, try to be good at that as best as you can and stuff like that. But then what are other games can you play and have some fun with and learn some skills with? Because to me, that's really where the game of life is. It's not just getting to school, getting grades, because now that we're out of school, even though we're both working kind of with the school system, we recognize how irrelevant it is to like day-to-day real life and stuff like that.
Yeah. No one's ever asked me for a multiple choice test, kids.
And it's a lot more about mastering yourself, like the discipline of like, how do I actually get myself to do that hard X3 workout where I'm screaming and grunting for the last 30 seconds of it? Because it's not necessarily fun to do that. It's tough because you have to face up against yourself with that. And the same thing with jiu-jitsu is like, do I actually want to push? It's like, it's easy just to be like, tap. Or do I actually kind of want to fight for that last? And there's a time to fight, there's a time not to fight.
And I'm very grateful that gym I have a coach who's coached me here and there and said like, hey man, don't give up there. Like, you can still escape. It's like, wow, I didn't even think of that. Like, it didn't even occur to me. Like, in my mind, I already have that mentality of like, okay, this sequence of events is in motion and it's going to lead to a submission. Let's say arm bar or like a shoulder lock or whatever. And it's like, what's the point of fighting? And him just at 2 points in the 2 months that I've been there, coaching me, saying like, hey, what are you doing? Like, don't stop there. Like, keep going. Like, you can escape that. Now I bring that with me everywhere. It's like, wait, if I just like push a little bit this way, it's going to dislodge this person's hand slightly, and then I can pull my elbow. I can do this. I can do that. And with the upper body, with chokes, it's like very easy to like let that go on for a little bit longer. Leg stuff, it's like no, like I need to walk tomorrow, right? So you can have your little serotonin, whatever it is, dopamine of getting the submission, but recognizing it's like kind of the David Goggins mindset of like, okay, am I giving up when I've only given 40%? I mean, am I confusing my 40% for 100? Like, what is actually happening here? How much more do I have in the tank? And like even recently, I rolled with Tio, a good friend of mine, and he was saying like, man, like you're rolling really well. And, like there was a brown belt watching. He was like, damn, that was a good sparring session. One of the black belts who coaches there was sparring with a white belt, and he was kind of looking over his shoulder, watching us roll. And, like the main coach was watching us too. And it's like, but in that sparring session, like it felt good when I went in with the mindset of like, no, like I want to get into the advantageous position, and I want to be in that dogfight, right? Knowing that I can trust this guy and I'm safe sparring with him. It's not like I'm doing this with every random person, right? But having that mentality, it's like it just feels so good, right? This is a game I want to play, and this is the effort I want to put in, and I know that I'm going to feel good after it.
Well, one thing that Dr. Paul Dobransky talked about too is that life, for the most part, is choice and intentionality. And so he kind of had his students have 2 examples. Okay, it's like the first week, I want you to just go through life and just like, you're hungry, whatever restaurant is like kind of closest, you just go there. And whatever, just kind of like the path of least resistance. friends and whatever. Just kind of go through life like that for a week. And then the next life, the next week, I want you to be intentional. It's like, what do I want? And it's like, okay, I'm going to go to this restaurant, even if it's like a 20-minute drive away, or I have to spend all this time making this food. I like actually being intentional and choosing your life. And what students found is they far prefer the life of intentionality versus just kind of accepting whatever comes. And I think it's good to figure that out of like, because for me, I remember reading Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week, and then you mean like a few years later, I actually created a 4-Hour Work Week lifestyle. It's like, whoa, this is really cool. And then like even creating my own 4-hour, it's like 12 or 15-hour business a week, but it's like, it's really cool what I built. And I think having that intentionality of like, what do I want? And then creating it, it's like life's just so much more fun that way. Like if I had just kind of accepted like, I'm going to get a 9-to-5 job and I'm going to do whatever, and it's just not fun for me. It's like I'm low industriousness, and so I don't want to be working all the time, whereas you're high industriousness. And I think that if you're not working, then you got to get fat, lazy, and depressed. It's like you're doing a lot better.
All three, but
you're basically like with work and then jujitsu and all this kind of stuff. I think you're a lot happier, a lot healthier, and stuff like that. Whereas if I was on your schedule, my life would just fall apart. So you have to figure out who you are and what your lifestyle is. But it's like having that intentionality around it. It's like life can just be such an amazing game. But so many people, like we kind of meet Stephanie's boyfriends, and it's like they all hate their work, and it's like,
and their lives.
Yeah, and it's like they're like 37, 38 years old, and they're just down to accept that. Like they're just looking for a wife to lock into them with it, and like we're just going down together. And it's like, have you like? To me, it's just perplexing. Like, have you thought this through at all? If you don't like your life, why would you expect anybody else to want to join that life and find it enjoyable? Yeah, it's perplexing, but that's most people.
Right, and that exercise we did over the summer, and I still have those notes here, but I was thinking earlier today as well, like I should sit down at some point and do like, what are my 50-year goals, like when I'm 75, right? But having a bit of that access to that bigger picture. And, if you're like in high school, like, what is your 10-year goal, right? Because you're going to get there very quick, man. Like I'm pushing that 10 years very soon. And so having a bit of that bigger picture is like really helpful, and it kind of shifts and helps you understand. Because, one of the goals for mine was like somewhere like top 10 percentile for physical fitness, right? And just mostly just physique, really. And so, I go through life now. It's like, okay, like, do I want to eat this cookie? Like, do I want to have 5 cookies, right? Do I want to eat this muffin? Do I want to go pile through all this sugar? And part of it is no. And the other part is that, well, having awareness of, well, how does this make me feel after, right? Like, I know how sugar makes me feel. Now I had a cookie at my parents' place after like an hour of like walking around like, oh man, that cookie looks really good, right? And but just recognizing, it's like, okay, well, one cookie's not going to destroy me, but also that, like, not making it a habit, right, of just poor choices and no intentionality and no real big picture purpose.
Well, one thing I think it's very useful to think about is to look at your parents or look at your grandparents and see what about their lives you like and what you dislike, because they're very similar to you, and it's very likely that you're kind of on the same path to them. And in particular, I saw with both my parents that their relationships weren't very good because they were with different people. And it's like, okay, that's a part of my life that I really need to craft and cultivate. And then also with like the boss I was working for as a marketing manager for 3 years, I looked at his life and I didn't really like it. It's like he wasn't surrounded by peers. He was surrounded by employees, so people that are kind of by nature below him, and then also family members who weren't really business oriented, weren't really success. They're just kind of want to live a regular life. And to me, it was just a very sad life of like, you're just kind of around people who are below you. And you kind of have, a lunch with a business friend or something like that every now and then. And it filled him with so much life and energy and joy and stuff like that. But it would just happen so rarely. And so kind of to me, it's like, I don't want all this obligations. Like, I don't want all these employees, these buildings, these problems and stuff like that. Because I saw that kind of just keeps you locked in. But then I also was like, I want to be surrounded by amazing people. Like you kind of see it at the Brazilian Jiu Jitsu gym. It's like there iron sharpens iron, and like there's a lot of great people there, and kind of bring everybody else up. You mean? So there's something to be said for that to me, but I want that more in my life as a general thing, not just kind of like nicheified into yoga, jujitsu, whatever it is. It's like I just wanted great people around me that I could spend my life with. So like when I'm at my funeral, or like when I'm dead at 80 years old, it's like my funeral is surrounded by people whose lives I've helped change, grow. You mean, and ideally like the next level of like the people that you're going to help grow and develop and change and all that kind of stuff. And it's not even about the ego trip, but it's just like if I'm at the end of my life, would I want to have $3 million in the bank or big business? It's like, nah, like I don't care about any of that stuff. But what I want is to have to help change people's lives and stuff like that to make them better.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, that's kind of what my intentionality is. Is like I think about the tutoring business and do I want to scale up, get more tutors, all do advertising, whatever. It's like I don't really care. You mean it's like I love the money I make from it. I love the lifestyle it provides, but I don't see tutoring changing the world and stuff like that. But you mean these conversations, like one of the people I met when I was giving away stuff on Facebook Marketplace, I was giving away my marketing books, and he was like, at the end, he's like, yeah, so I'm like, wanting to start my own business, and then we got into a good conversation about that, and he's thinking about like starting his own cleaning business, and gave him lots of advice, and that was very meaningful to me, of like helping kind of young entrepreneurs, people who want to create a life of intentionality of something new. To me, that's super exciting. And so it's like thinking that through is super valuable because a lot of people talk about finding your purpose, and there's kind of this expectation that you should find it like right now. Like David Data says, like, you mean it's like sit in a room until you found it. And I'm like, yeah. But what I think of finding your purpose is like what's kind of pulling you or what's kind of holding your interest, kind of like the golden snitch of like what's that kind of flitter of gold that's holding your interest and your excitement, and then kind of pursuing that and then seeing where it takes you and then kind of readjusting course and going back and forth. And then after 5 or 10 years of that, you kind of narrowed in on what your interest actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And not necessarily just following what society's telling you of like, hey, you should be an engineer, you should be a doctor, you should be a lawyer. Because you have no idea if you're actually going to like that. Like, you mean, it's get good grades, but it's like go spend like 2 years, like work in an engineering firm for like 2-3 months as like
At whatever level you can, right?
Yeah.
Like if you got to be the mail boy,
Yeah.
be the mail boy, right?
exactly, and do a good job, and then see, do you like, are these people happy? Are they living the lives you want to live? Are they like the hours that they're working? Do you want to do that? Then go to like a medical clinic, do the same thing, and like try out some of these jobs. And instead of putting all this time, energy, and money into a potential career, it's like actually do that, and then you'll actually find out like they might even actually end up paying for your school. Like if you're a really good employee and you're doing good work on that stuff like that, and they need you to have this degree to do whatever, they might even pay for it.
It reminds me of kind of the third Transformers movie, Dark of the Moon, where Shia LaBeouf's character is like, he's now saved the world twice. He's in the third movie at the start. He's kind of like graduated university kind of thing or whatever. And he wants to move into the world with purpose and intention, but also wants to be kind of meaningful, right? It's like, hey man, I've saved the world twice. Like I know what I'm doing. Like I've been through hell. I've been to hell and back. I've died literally and come back to life. I've had all this responsibility on my shoulders, and I've passed that test. And his first job out of university is being a mail boy in like an engineering firm.
Mm-hmm.
And he's kind of depressed by it at first, but then there's a montage of the movie where he just does the hell out of his job.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, that opportunity just out of nowhere comes and grasps him, and then now he's back into the mix and he's got to save the world now.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, like it's a movie and they're going to go at a grand scale, but it's like we often are offered opportunities to save our own world. It's like I can make poor choices and be a terrible son, and then my parents have to sit there and be like, oh my God, what is our son doing? Or I could do these small little things which makes me a valued son and a contributor to the family. It makes me a valued friend. It makes me someone that can be relied upon. And just recognizing like you're gonna have to, do the crappy work. Like you're gonna have to scrub dishes. You're gonna have to be the mail boy. You're gonna have to have crappy bosses and supervisors, but having that intentionality really makes a difference, right? Like knowing for myself in junior high as well. Um, Junior high was an interesting experience for me, but my intention, my mindset towards it was like recognizing that these people are so temporary in my life. Like they're not going to be around. So nothing they ever said bothered me. And, on the outside, some people might say, oh, Najib was bullied. But on the inside, I was like, well, I know I'm not going to be friends with these people in like 3 years. Like, so instead, iron sharpened iron. And like, if anybody fires anything at me, I fire right back, right? And like, I know how to do that very well. But having that intention and purpose and mindset, growth mindset, can help you get out of these situations where maybe it is your parents breathing down your neck about your grades and making you feel bad about that, or maybe if you're a kid, hopefully not yet, but maybe that bottle is calling to you to drink and finish it, or whatever substance it is you rely upon. But just recognizing that it does take a lot of time. Even for myself, I'm still trying to figure out my purpose in life, and it's not really solidified yet, but I feel as if I'm making progress, at least moving towards something that. And for someone with high openness, it's like even difficult to narrow down a purpose, but having found something that is very meaningful and brings a lot of joy to my life is very important. And that wasn't my first job. It wasn't even my first inclination. Like in high school, like 8 days before the deadline for university, had you asked me like, oh, do you want to be a teacher? I would have laughed in your face. I would have pointed and laughed. 1 week before, having a conversation with one of my coaches, phys ed teachers, and a friend and mentor, it was like, yeah, actually, this is a pretty smart idea. Like, I think I'd actually like this. And when I started out on that journey, like, I had no idea what to expect and no idea the hellhole that I would be sent into at the University of Alberta. And not having intentionality and purpose for the first 2.5, 3 years, and amongst a variety of reasons, sent me into a depressive spiral. But after my trip around the world, recognizing all the value I could bring into a classroom with who I am as a person, realizing, like, okay, this is my intention, this is my mindset, this is how I need to move through this experience of university so I can get out of here quickly and get into a classroom because that's where I belong, right? And having that intention can really take your suffering, because like many of my students, many of you like have been, I'm grateful that you share many aspects of your life with me, but to hear like what goes on in their households and how they're treated, it's very, very difficult. And I can't imagine kind of how they are existing. But to have that intention of like, okay, this is temporary. And this is what I want to do with my life, and to recognize that my parents don't see a value in that, or my community doesn't see a value in that. Like, just to play devil's advocate, like they might be right. Like you might want to do some nonsense, but at least moving through with your own frame. Like, this is who I am, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to try. And then, as Trent was saying, like having that process of experimenting and winning the experiment. Because how many people go through life with no intention, no purpose, and just for the fear of not God, but fear of the crowd, they just do what is kind of expected of them or told, right? And you got to ask yourself, it's like, is a life without intention and purpose one that you want to live, right? Do you want to be, like, have you been to the West End water park?
Not in a long time.
But you've been to a water park. Like, do you want to be that person in the middle just getting bodied by all the floaties and everybody in there? Or do you want to have a little intention, a little bit of space around you that, like, okay, I'm moving through life with a bit of a cushion because I know who I am and I know what I want? Or are you just getting bodied by the waves and the people and just going where everyone else goes, right? And how do you develop that mindset at 15? I don't know. I don't think I necessarily had that. And if I did, it wasn't very sharp. And part of it does just come with age, like slowly interacting with new information and exploration of yourself.
And one thing I think about too when it comes to mindset is that, so a lot of your students are probably working at jobs like McDonald's, things like that. And there's kind of two different ways to come at it. It's like, I'm not getting paid, or this job is temporary, and all this kind of BS. And it's like, kind of reminds me of one of Jim Rohn's things. It's like, so he comes in late to the office, heads out early for lunch, comes back late, heads out early for the end of the day, and basically saying, like, the best I can figure, I'm getting paid a full day's wage for a half day's work. And it's like, that's one philosophy. and maybe you get away with that for a month, 2 months, whatever it is. But where does that lead you down your life?
Well, maybe your career, right? Maybe that's who you are as a person.
But it's like on the flip side, it's like, what if you came in to hour early? What if you took on the responsibility, like you see something that needs to be done, instead of waiting to be told to do it, you just fix it, you make it better. Like I remember, like I worked on oil rigs for a week. It's way too rough of a job for me. But so one of the things that they had me do is like clean the cab of some of the trucks. You mean like you just clean there? And I remember like after the drive or switching trucks or something like that, they came up to me and it's like, "Hey, you actually cleaned the truck." And it's like, I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Nobody cleans the truck. They just sleep." You mean because like nobody's there. Like you're just in the cab of like a truck by yourself, kind of like of equipment truck. And so I actually went through and like cleaned like the headboard, cleaned like the roof, and like I just cleaned it. You mean it's like, hey,
You did your job.
exactly.
Yeah.
And they're like shocked because like nobody did that. Like they'd all just
Yeah.
like sleep for like 3 hours there.
Maybe pick up some junk here and there, but not actually properly clean. Yeah.
And so it's like that. I could have been like of the attitude of like, oh, this oil rigging job isn't for me. These are rednecks and blah blah blah. But it's like just having that attitude of actually doing the work. You know, what I mean, it's like here's the work set before me. I'm gonna do it to the best of my abilities. And like same thing, it's like as you do that, you increase your responsibility. And it's kind of like Jock was saying, it's like discipline equals freedom. So it's like if you have that discipline, if you take these things and you actually do them well, you gain wisdom and you gain insight, and then eventually you're provided with the freedom at like kind of the top of like where you kind of do whatever you want. Um, and to me, it's like that's the life you want to live. Like you gotta think things through. It's like you could just be lazy during the moment of what you like want to do is easiest, but it's like really you want to think like, what can I do? What value can I add? What extras can I do? Like even with my boss, with like what I was working at this marketing company, it's like he called me up one time, and I think they had run out of stain for their patio. Like you mean it's like a 3 hour drive north of they have this cabin, and he's like, "Can you get me some of this stain?" I'm like, "Sure." I mean, it's like cool. It'd be a cool adventure. Just like go to the store, buy it, drive out there. But I didn't screw around. You mean I wasn't like stopping at McDonald's, sitting there for an hour and stuff like that. I got my job done. I did it. But that's kind of like how I always approach it. Like you just do it. Like you mean there's things that aren't fun. Like I helped him move a fridge one day. Like you mean it's like after work he's like, "Hey, I got to go buy this fridge or whatever. It's expensive and it's heavy and shit like that." I'm like, "Okay." Like you mean just go do it. And I think I even lent him $50 for it one time. Never got it back directly, but you mean he's paying me like $3,000 a month. It's like $50 is very cheap for that. But you mean it's so much about your attitude. How do you approach life? It's like, are you always looking to get, or are you just looking to give? And then it's like life gives to the giver and takes from the taker. So
We'll end it at that because we're
Sounds
almost
good.
at an hour.
Okay.
Thank you.